This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Lots of speculation about Arron Banks and Leave.eu. I'll give a response to that during the course of this programme. But something I thought that was really very interesting this morning. A speech that was given by the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, Sarah Thornton, that had me thinking, wow, I really agree with this. Here she was.
We are, however, asked to provide more and more bespoke services that are all desirable. But the simple fact is that there are too many desirable and deserving issues. For example, treating misogyny as a hate crime is a concern for some well-organised campaigning organisations. In July, Chiefs debated whether we should record such allegations even when no crime has been committed. But we just don't have the resources to do everything that is desirable and deserving. I want us to solve more burglaries and bear down on violence before we make records of incidents that are not crimes. While I understand those that have been harmed seek answers, I remain unconvinced that it is appropriate to commit significant resource to investigating allegations against those who have died. Now, neither investigating gender-based hate crime or indeed investigating allegations against those who have died are necessarily bad things. I'm just arguing they cannot be priorities for a service that's overstretched.
So, overstretched service, it's a question of priorities. Well, Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott responded.
I understand what Sarah's saying. She's one of our foremost police leaders and she doesn't pull her punches. But the truth is, the police should not be picking and choosing what crimes they engage with.
Well, I think they should. You see, I saw this put out last year from the Metropolitan Police exactly a year ago when they boasted we have 900 plus specialist officers across London dedicating to investigating all hate crime. For more information, visit met.police, etc., etc. Now, we're not arguing that genuine hate crime is a good thing, but I think what we are arguing, and take London as an example, the explosion of knife crime, burglary rates, that actually the police have to prioritise. And look at this time and money that was spent. Some bloke called Nick, who's turned out to be a complete and utter fantasist, making a series of allegations against Sir Edward Heath and other long-dead leading political figures. You know, all that money that's been spent on that, frankly, was, it seems to me, pretty much wasted money. And on hate crime, you know, we do see a very, very big explosion of the number of hate crimes that are reported, and I'm sure that in some cases it's very genuine. But it's actually quite an easy way, isn't it? Quite an easy way to try and damage someone that you don't like. You report them for a hate crime, they get investigated. It is about priorities. Police have to make these decisions. They've got to make them every single day. That's what I think. You tell me, who's right? Sarah Thornton, who says the police have to prioritise, and she says things like violent crime has got to be higher, or Diane Abbott, who says all of those crimes need to be looked at on an even-handed basis. You know my thoughts. Tell me. If you think that Diane Abbott's right, call 0345 6060 973. If you think Sarah Thornton is right, then please text to 84850. Maybe you've been the victim of a crime that wasn't investigated. Maybe you work within one of our police services and you have a view, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course, watch us on Facebook. We're live from London. Next, Nigel, common sense at last. Diane Abbott is wrong. I get anonymously by text. Of course we should prioritise crimes. Totally agree with the police lady. What is the point of spending loads of money and resources investigating accusations against a dead person, says Paul from Bedford. Paul, I'm with you. I really am. Ian is a brand new caller to us from Woking in Surrey. Hi, Ian.
Hey, good evening.
So who's right, Diane Abbott or Sarah Thornton?
I think the police do prioritise, but they prioritise some things completely wrongly. Especially when it comes to husbands and ex-wives.
Right. Go on.
Okay. Me personally, after my divorce, nearly 2 years after my divorce, my ex-wife decided to break into a garage, cut the lock, remove property that belonged to me, that the court had given to me, that was mine 100%, and promptly, because it wasn't her property, it was 2 motorcycles, She then got rid of them, scrapped them, and that was a value of £70,000.
Wow.
And the police would not do anything about it. They called it a domestic.
Well, Ian, I have to say, I was involved in a crime where some pretty serious damage was done to property of mine, and the police decided not to prosecute anybody. So I'm with you, Ian. I've been in that situation. I guess it's always easy to criticise people who are doing a very difficult job. But Ian, when you hear the Metropolitan Police boasting that they've got getting on for 1,000 specialist officers investigating hate crime, what do you make of that?
Well, I don't mind the police. I'm a biker, but I don't mind the police. The police do a good job if they're given the right tools and if they're allowed to do the right job. But when it comes to picking and choosing the jobs they get, just because at the end of the day they want a conviction and they don't want a lot on their table saying unconvicted or unsolved, then that is wrong, just because they just want to pick and choose.
All right, OK. Ian says they pick and choose. They're looking to get scores on the doors, which may well, in some cases, be true. Paul is calling from Brecon in Mid Wales. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening. Well, first of all, I think Diane Abbott lives in a world with unlimited resources. And we live in a world where we've got 0.6% of the income tax population paying 25% of the total income tax bill, and they think that they can keep on adding to this and get unlimited resources to squander. That's the basic way she thinks. And you've got to prioritise. Now, let me give you an example. I'm actually suffering from a fraud at the moment to the tune of 30,000 quid.
Bad luck.
When you report that fraud to the police, they say you've got to report it online to the fraud centre. The fraud centre say they'll react in 28 days. They don't. Then they say it'll be 3 months. You can't even speak to a person about it. You can't do anything, and the fraud carries on for other people.
Do you think, Paul, if you'd reported a hate crime, that you might have got more prompt attention?
I'd have got people around straight away. And where you've got... Look, I also think it's an infringement of our civil rights to investigate non-crimes. So if you...
Well, misogyny is one, Paul. I mean, this is something that Sarah Thornton talked about today, and she made the point that there are some well-funded lobby groups lobbying hard to have misogyny listed as a crime, and she just says, look, we can't prioritise this. She's right basically she's got it right, hasn't she?
Totally correct. And they should actually really ramp down this hate crime nonsense, because to report a thing that's not a crime, and for the police to put your name down and investigate when it's not a crime, is almost Big Brotherland. It's almost 1984.
Yeah, no, it worries me too, Paul. It really does. Thank you. Richard is a new caller from Manchester. Hi, Richard.
Yeah, hi there. Well, yet again, Diane Abbott's got it wrong. Heaven help us if she's ever Home Secretary.
Well, she might be, Richard. She might well be.
Heaven help us. The bottom line is this, that any of the blue light services, the police, the ambulance, the fire service, they have to, by nature, define a list of priority cases that they address. In a hospital, it's called triage. Somebody comes in, having a heart attack, it's more likely that they're going to be attended to than somebody who's got a broken nose. And the same thing is, with the police out there, give them the recognition that they have to determine that which is more urgent than the others.
Absolutely.
Why she turns round and says, Diane Abbott, that, I don't think they should be making these sorts of decisions. She needs to get into the real world. This is real life. They have to make these decisions every single second, probably of every minute of every hour.
Richard, Richard, you are completely and utterly right. I think what she's saying is we shouldn't devalue the concept of hate crime, but the world has changed, hasn't it? A lot. A big generational change here. I used to be told, Richard, if I was to complain that someone had said something nasty about me, I'd be told sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And just, buck up and get on with it. That's what we were told in the past. But now it's as if anyone feels that a comment made by another human being has caused offence, it has to be investigated.
Nigel, if I was a victim of a hate crime and someone had determine my ethnicity, my religion, or whatever, and had decided to, say something that's totally unacceptable. As much as that is not right, and as much as I would want that person to be dealt with, if there is someone that is being robbed or someone that's being raped or someone that's being attacked, I would step aside and say, let the police deal with that first, for goodness sake. Diane Abbott, really, you worry me to death.
OK, Richard, they're saying, goodness help us if she becomes Home Secretary. I want to hear from Diane Abbott supporters, 03456060973. Michael says, hate crimes are such an ambiguous crime. With the threat from knife crime, yup. Moped thefts, yup. Terrorism, yup. It is paramount the police prioritise the most serious crimes to keep the British people safe. It's as simple as that. Michael, it is, in my view. I'm with you. As simple as that. Let's see if Paul, who's a new caller from St Albans, agrees with that. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
Not a bit. So,
I must admit, not being the biggest fan in the political spectrum, but I actually felt very compelled by your conversation today, and I actually agree. So,
welcome.
Actually, the point I wanted to raise is that I actually work in the forecourt retail business, and we get victimised by quite a lot of crime. People driving off without paying on quite a grand scale. And we're having a massive problem with the police right now. I don't know if you read a report in the last few days that I think it's 25 police forces in the UK now have actually downgraded it, and that they won't respond to calls. I just really wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No, I did see that, and I was shocked by that, because that is theft, plain and simple. And I think this is really what Sarah Thornton was talking about. I mean, she was more talking about, violent crime or robbery, burglary, which can be violent, as opposed to what you're seeing. But no, hate crime, Paul, may not be very nice, but it can't be a priority over things such as you're suffering at work every single day. Paul, thank you very much indeed for that call. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:15, and it is tough for the police. I mean, they've had cuts of about 20% over the course of the last few years. I think that is undeniable in terms of personnel. And, of course, there are now more things that are crimes. Hate crimes didn't actually exist a few years ago. So fewer police and more areas of our life that are now considered to be crimes, or certainly subject to investigation. Not easy for them. Support coming in here for Sadiq Khan. He isn't responsible for the rise in knife crime. The government cutting the police funding is. Well, whether that's true or not, I think Sadiq's problem is that he doesn't. Last I looked, he hadn't investigated a single one of the crime sites in London, which I found totally and utterly extraordinary. And Jane says, thieves will cotton onto the lack of police fast, if not already. They can steal with impunity. We have little protection. Jane, do you know something? The rise in crime in my lifetime has been so great. We're now at the point where many of us don't even bother to report crime. We've just given up. We've just accepted that we're living in a world where things are going to get stolen from us. It's pretty awful. And Kenny's got one very positive suggestion on Facebook, and he says, stop bullying in schools and you will halve future problems. Bullies evolve into crime as a natural course. I guess, Kenny, you're talking about bullies, not just saying things, but effectively running junior mini criminal rings at school and getting away with it. Let's talk about free speech. Let's talk about Luca, who's a new caller from Lancing. Good evening to you.
Hello, good evening. It's really nice to talk to you, Nigel.
Good to have you on. So, come on, you're going to tell us about free speech.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the point about hate crime, it's something that's developed all the way since the UN started compiling the articles, and the Soviet Union started suggesting articles to do with hate crime and free speech. They wanted to use it in their country to stifle opposition speech. Opposition speech.
Yep.
I mean, back then some of it passed, but not really. But I mean, our own government is capitulating to it by pushing through these really poor definitions. I think it was Yorkshire Police, but I'm not quite sure, that posted a tweet where they said hate crime. They said that it's not necessarily a crime,
right?
And it's defined by the court, and that's just a complete open gate to abuse, and it's happening all over Europe in terms of hate crime being really poorly defined.
Yeah.
Like with the Austrian woman, did you hear about her who was arrested?
I did hear about that. Do briefly explain that to us, Luca.
Okay, well, basically there was an Austrian woman, I believe she said that Mohammed was a pedophile.
She did.
And that is a fact.
Well, it was a very offensive comment, but what was interesting about that ruling from the European Court of Human Rights is that they ruled that to say that was unacceptable and was a hate crime. And yet, look, you and I right now could say what we like about Pope Francis or about our useless Archbishop. We could say what we like about them, and that's fine. And that's one of the problems here, isn't it? That we're actually saying that there are certain categories of people who have to be treated to others, and that is a real problem.
It is the end goal of some kind of two-tier legal system. I mean, I was looking for the fact that Qurans, Bibles, etc., can be burned and can get a penalty for that. But in the reality, the police are putting other crimes, prioritising them, and this is the same thing we're seeing with hate speech and hate crime in general.
Well, maybe then, look, you'll agree with me that what we heard today from the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, Sarah Thornton, was actually quite refreshing.
Definitely, yeah. We're not seeing it from the administration. I feel sorry for a lot of the police officers because if I had a career and a pension lined up and a family to support, it's quite hard to just give up the job out of a moral president.
No, of course it is. Look, thank you. Interesting points. Hi, Nige. What happens when 20,000 football fans call the other side's fans names? Isn't that a massive hate crimes? Gary, I think they should all be taken in for long, lengthy interviews and counselling. The relentless political correctness in society is seriously damaging my health. Will the police please investigate this crime against my sanity, says Mike in Norwich. I thought all understood that it's more important to catch a stabber than to somebody being nasty on Facebook. Your message is pouring in. I want to keep the calls going. Sean is calling from Kidderminster. Hi, Sean.
Hi. Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm okay, Sean, but I actually think that the honest truth is, and we had one caller making the point, that in the NHS you prioritise and in policing you prioritise. And I think Diane Abbott is absolutely wrong when she says that basically, the police shouldn't pick and choose. They've got to, surely.
Well, I mean, my reason for calling actually is because I heard a few people with very similar incidents actually to what happened to myself.
Okay.
Now, I won't bore you with too much detail, but long story short, I rented a flat in Canary Wharf from these agents. Very, very crooked people. I mean, they made alterations. They're meant to actually be one-bedroom flats, but what they do is they gain access to the property, pop up a plasterboard wall, and then rent it into as several different rooms. Now, basically, my whole entire flat was emptied by my letting agents. I lost absolutely every single thing I've ever owned. All my university books, like literally everything. Just imagine losing every single gift that you've ever received. I mean, there's certain things of sentimental value that, no amount of money can replace. There is no monetary value on it because of the sentimentalness.
Yes.
And I mean, it's everything from start to finish was reported to the police. In fact, on one occasion, police were present when somebody else who had just moved into the flat confirmed, yes, when I moved into this flat, this cupboard was full of somebody's belongings, and I called the letting agency, and they're the ones who came and took it. And the policeman was there, and he absolutely point blank refused to take a mini statement from the boy who bed witness.
Why do you think that was?
Of the crime. Yeah.
Why? Why,
later
Sean?
on down the line, I complained this to the police. It went up and up to a sergeant who actually took it upon herself to close the case of theft based on her own satisfaction. And, they closed it saying that it was because they didn't have sufficient evidence. Well, of course they didn't, because, they didn't make any attempts to gain any.
And had you, Sean, yourself ever been in trouble with the police before?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. I graduated from university, and from there I started doing some contracting. I was just taking whatever work I could get because contracting tends to be a lot quicker, But, I mean, for young students going into the job market, I mean, it's tough enough without people. I just think it needs to be brought to people's attention how dangerous.
No, that is Sean. Your case is very, very unpleasant, and I'm sorry. And I trust you've got things back on track now.
Well, I mean, slowly but surely, these things, I'm very much looking forward to see the back end of it now. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, these things They take time. I've been told by the police that it's not a crime, actually. The burglary isn't a crime. It's a civil matter. And so,
What between you and the letting agent, yeah?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, well, the trouble, Sean, here is the trouble, Sean, here is without looking at the contract and what you signed, and look, whatever happens wrong, but it may well be that you signed something that perhaps you shouldn't. I don't know, Sean. Thank you for that. And yeah, as I say, there's somebody else who, second caller, and I've added to it myself. You can be the victim of crime and they do nothing, and it makes you very, very upset indeed. My van has been broken into 3 times in 2 years. I've reported this every time, and the police didn't even bother to come out and have a look. Now, I don't even lock my van, as it cost me more to repair the lock than it cost me to replace the stolen items, says Anton from Devon. Anton, you are one of so many. We've stopped reporting lots of crimes. We can't be bothered. The police don't seem to be bothered. We know if we do and make a claim, the insurance companies will affect our premiums, and this is all reflective of a massive rise in crime in this country over the last few decades. Dave is calling from Enfield. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Nigel.
Good to speak to you. So, tell me, wasn't this a bit of common sense that we heard today?
Absolutely. I think you've got to prioritise physical crime over those that are
verbal,
the ones that impact us, the foremost. And I'm totally in agreement with that. And there's something I want to mention about the word misogyny. There's something we always forget about. There's the word misandry as well, and gender watchdogs don't want to talk about that. That is the hatred of men.
Yep.
And I think if you become a misogyny, if you make that a hate crime, you have to make the other one, misandry, as well, a hate crime.
Otherwise, Dave, we're back to what I said 10 minutes ago about religions, that we're allowed to be as critical as we like against some religions, but not against others. No, I agree with that completely. So why do you think they won't do it?
I just think it's a dark secret, for these for people who've got a particular agenda.
I think, Dave, I think the truth is, and Sarah Thornton got to it earlier when she said there are some very well-funded campaigns looking to make misogyny a crime, and there aren't any well-funded campaigns looking to make misandry a crime. That's what it comes down to, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can look at you can go to being absolutely neutral on this. And I think neutral and fair is what we should all be about. And it's got to be fair for all sides. And it goes down to certain crimes in court as well, whereby you are a victim and then you are the accused. But the accused gets named and the victim remains, shall we say, incognito. And I think to have a fair, neutral trial for everyone, I do believe in, and again, it comes back to very similar views, is that everybody is entitled to
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Dave, I thank you. Nigel, I despise avocado pears. Can I expect to be charged for a hate crime by the Vegan Society, says Hilton from St Albans. Well, who knows but where we're going. Now, talking about police time, talking about investigations, I think we need to talk about the National Crime Agency and Aaron Banks and Leave.eu. We really do. But for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 6:30 in time. Well, Diane Abbott is very, very clear. The police have to investigate all crimes equally, but Police Chief Sarah Thornton says they've got to prioritise and use the resources they've got to go for, violent crimes, knife crimes, burglary, that kind of thing, and worry a bit less about accusations such as misogyny. It is about resources and it is about priorities. Now, this is not the first time that we've heard stories about Leave.eu founder and main donor Aaron Banks, because, of course, already the Electoral Commission have found them guilty of overspending in the referendum, something for which now Banks is countersuing the Electoral Commission, and that will come to court in a few months' time. Today, they've been investigating the source of the money. They say they have reasonable grounds to suspect that Mr. Banks was not the true source of the cash. They're talking about, in particular, an Isle of Man company. Now, if it's your money and it's in the Isle of Man, and you bring it back into the UK and you spend it, and the tax authorities are happy with how you've done it, there's nothing wrong with it if it's your money. What's interesting here is actually the Electoral Commission haven't actually really said anything. They've got reasonable grounds. I mean, they may have reasonable grounds to think all sorts of things about Aaron Banks. I don't know. So it goes to the National Crime Agency, and surprise, surprise, we get people like George Monbiot. The key question is, if they did commit criminal offences, what then? Surely the referendum should be declared invalid, and they're all out there doing it. The David Lammies and everybody. Isn't the timing of this just perfect? We're in November. There's going to be a key critical Commons vote on all of this within the next couple of months. And I will say this, any thought that the Electoral Commission are neutral in what they do is, I think, completely thrown out of the window by looking at the composition of them. Of the 10 people who are on that board, I mean, 4 of them have very, very publicly given their pro-Remain views, and the rest are all part of the pro-EU establishment. I've had my battles with them. They tried really hard to close UKIP down as a political force, whilst at the same time ignoring big donations that went to the Liberal Democrats. And I've no doubt they've done this to Leave.eu. I've no doubt in the next few days you'll see the same thing said about Vote Leave. So, you know, it's a big row. It's going mad on Twitter, and it'll be used in the House of Commons. It'll be used everywhere. Yet we have to nullify the referendum result because they may have done something wrong. They may have done something wrong. I very much doubt it, but we will see. Back to policing priorities. Paul is a new caller from Margate. Hi, Paul.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening. So.
Good evening to you, sir. Nigel, this is the first time I'm ever going to disagree with anything you've ever said.
Right, go on then.
I'm 100% behind you on everything, and conversely against everything Diane Abbott says. However,
right,
in New York in the early 80s, it was just a cesspit. I mean, it was awful. And Mayor Giuliano, you'll remember.
I know him. I'm a huge fan.
Well, he introduced quite a controversial policy there of broken windows, and it worked. It worked. Now, you'd have thought that a plan that works would have been adopted by our police here. Well, look, it works. Let's study it and do the same here. But in fact, they've steadfastly ignored all the progress it's made. And in fact, New York is a fabulous place now, and he's directly responsible for that. I live in Margate. In fact, I met you in Margate High Street not long ago.
Okay.
Anyway, the police here steadfastly refuse to tackle any kind of low-level antisocial behaviour. And consequently, what could be a very, very nice little seaside town is almost feral, you know, during some parts of the year and at some hours of the night.
Yeah.
You know, they will not patrol or tackle.
Okay.
They think if you allow the police to prioritise, they'll get it wrong. They're not good enough to prioritise correctly.
Okay, you make a very good argument, Paul, and I'm a big fan of Rudy Giuliani. I agree with you. I mean, I remember from my first days visiting New York to now, the change, it's absolutely transformational. It was fantastic, and Broken Windows was about low-level crime, wasn't it? Low-level crime, and literally broken windows, graffiti, and sort of the feeling that an area was a bad place meant that it actually did become a bad place in terms of the drugs trade or whatever else, illegal it may be going on. But Paul, I'll just sort of slightly take issue here because what she said very, very clearly today, Sarah Thornton, what she talked about were resources being used to investigate allegations against people who were dead, and she also specifically talked about allegations of misogyny. All right. Would you agree, Paul, that they may not be the right priorities for our police force?
Yes, I do. I can see the logic. Obviously, there's some crimes are more serious than others, and I don't agree that name calling is a crime anyway. But
right, okay.
But I don't trust the police to
make the right decision. Okay. Now, in terms of, we'll park that one. But what you've said is really interesting. That this was a specific policy. The guy was elected to do this. He did it. He changed New York. What are the kinds of antisocial behaviour in Margate you would like to see the constabulary dealing with?
Well, there's a lot of low-level antisocial behaviour, which includes everything you've said. Fouling of dog fouling, graffiti, noise, drunkenness, drug addicts, selling drugs. Drug sellers. But speeding, just general mayhem.
Yeah, but I certainly know Cliftonville, just down the road from you. I mean, I wouldn't want to walk there of an evening, I have to say. So I know what you're saying. Paul, you make a very, very good point, and thank you for calling. And Paul's saying that actually, you know, there are some other directional priorities that the police maybe should be instructed to follow. I think that's the best counter-argument we've heard thus far this evening. But I don't think Sarah Thornton was... I think what she was arguing was very much, and she was referring, wasn't she, really, to the investigation into former Prime Minister Sir Edward Heath by some bloke called Nick, who turned out to be a complete fantasist. But very interesting points that have been made there. I stopped reporting crime about 4 years ago, I've been saying this, following an assault against myself and young children. I'd already stopped reporting bike thefts and my scooter being vandalised, but in this case, I provided a video to the police of the offence and they weren't interested. I also got the perpetrator's work address. I finally told the police I would sue them if they didn't act, and the chap got a £90 fine. I won't bother again. Robert, amidst this crime epidemic, a lot of us simply aren't bothering. Nigel, why are we even debating this? There should be so many more coppers to deal with all crime. The only debate is why isn't there, Paul in Petswood? Well, that is partly about expenditure and choices that governments make. Susan is a new caller from Havering. Good evening, Susan.
Hello, Nigel. Good to speak to you, sir.
Good to speak to you.
And for the record, I am a staunch Brexiteer, but that's not what I've called about.
No, it isn't, is it? Right. So crack on.
I'm actually calling about the current situation with policing. My son was the victim of a very violent assault back in June. This was reported to the police. He was hospitalised overnight. The police never attended the hospital. I reported the incident myself because due to his injuries, he couldn't actually speak. I didn't actually have a call from an investigating officer till a week later. When I actually reported it, we had a name and a full description, and I was told at the time that he was very well known to the police. So this would have been, for me, I would imagine, an easy arrest for them. Now, they took a week for an investigating officer to get in touch with me. I feel since the investigation started, it's been completely flawed. There was a sighting of the person that attacked my son, and when I contacted the police to tell them exactly where he was, they told me, and I've actually got this in writing, that they didn't have the time to go and find him.
So is Sarah Thornton right? I mean, you know, you're living within the Metropolitan Police area, Susan, just about, I think, aren't you, in Havering? Here you are.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So when they put out on Twitter, we have 900 plus specialist officers across London dedicated to investing all hate crime, do you agree with Sarah Thornton that perhaps they've got the priorities wrong and it's violent assaults against your son they should be worrying about?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Well, I think you've just made the argument for that very clearly. In the end, Susan,
can I just point out that this actually happened out of county. So we're in a different county to where the actual incident happened. Since the incident happened, I have not even met with a police officer, neither has my son. It's been all over the internet in terms of emails and text messages and telephone calls. It's been a faceless process the whole way through. And even today, we still don't have a resolution.
Right, there is no resolution.
I'm going through a complaints procedure at the moment, which, you know, it's extremely stressful. My son faces medical treatment, which we can ill afford at the moment, and that's going to be over a period of 9 to 12 months. The Criminal Compensation Board don't even pay enough to actually cover the costs of his medical treatment. But the whole thing is, the investigation, as far as we're concerned, was flawed. They had a name, a very good description. He was known to the police. We don't even know today if he was ever picked up, interviewed or cautioned.
No, that, of course, is where you start to get people like you that begin to lose confidence in the police, and that's the last thing we want. Susan, thank you for that sad story. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45. Police boss Sarah Thornton says the police have got to prioritise, given the allocations and resources they've got. They've got to put violence above hate crime. Diane Abbott takes a different view and says the police cannot pick and choose between crimes. And a lot of you are of raising budgets, proper police funding would allow the police to deal with all crimes against the public instead of having to concentrate on fining the motorists for minor offences to top up their finances. Malcolm, the police don't need to do much of that anymore. It's all speed cameras, really, isn't it? I would have thought. And one here I'm going to take real issue with. Caroline in Hants says, Mrs May doesn't appear to mind being guarded 24/7 by our police. Well, come on. The mammoth, and she goes on to talk about the mammoth cost of Mrs May's policing, about how she invested in the police force and didn't just take from it. Caroline, I do actually think, I'm sorry, but I do actually think that our Prime Minister probably does need to be looked after 24/7 for pretty obvious reasons. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. And Callum says on Twitter, in a perfect world, the police wouldn't have to prioritise crimes. But we don't live in that world, so we have to prioritise, and the police should be investigating burglaries and rape allegations before hate crimes. Callum, I think the vast majority of us would agree with that, although Paul from Margate made a very interesting point by saying that actually there are times when strategically perhaps some direction for the police, and he made the point about low-level crime in New York being dealt with and it transforming some districts. It was a good point. Pat is calling from Houghton Regis in Beds. Hi, Pat.
Hello there, Nigel.
Good evening. So how would you like to see the police operate?
Well, my grandson was the subject of an unprovoked attack, and it was so violent that, you know, after 3 years, he's having his 5th operation on his mouth, which he's then had to pay $13,000 towards to get it repaired. Now, they caught the driver, the perpetrator, but he wasn't actually the attacker, and he gave a name out, and because it was so common within that community, the police come to my house and said, we're dropping the case, we're not going any further with it. And to me, a few months later, the police were out putting leaflets, hate crime leaflets, in the same community's doors. And it makes you wonder, you think, hang on a minute.
I can't believe because of the name the police wouldn't pursue something.
They did. It sat in my house. Witnesses, all my family just sat there open mouth because it was the same, a name was too common. A common name. And if you talk about the budgets of the police, what they should have done was actually give more of the billions to the police, because if you give them more billions to put more numbers out on the streets, the casualties that go into the NHS start reducing, like on our roads, like knife crime. You know, they can prevent these things from happening if they've got the numbers.
Well, violent crime, Pat, is on the rise in quite a big way, isn't it?
It is, especially in Bedfordshire, because it's a hang-on to London, really. It's as close to London as you're ever going to get, and a lot of the criminals come out this way. So, yeah, I think they've missed the march there. They should have actually given many of the...
So, Pat, let me ask you, does what's happened to your grandson, does it make you lose faith in the police?
Well, I used to ring up quite a lot because I'm out on the roads and I see a lot of things happening with off-road bikes and that, and I used to ring up quite regularly. I don't ring up anymore, and the reason why I don't ring up is I've got that pesky answer phone message that goes on about stop verbally abusing our staff on the end of the line and this and that. And by the time you get through, the bikes are gone. They've gone about 5 miles.
There are so many disclaimers before you actually get through, Pat. That was a very interesting point to end with, and thank you. Nigel, I was a victim of crime. The police were brilliant, but the CPS wouldn't prosecute despite having the necessary evidence. Why? I can't answer that. Again, it is part of this chain. A lot of us who've been victims of crime are upset that it wasn't prosecuted. It wasn't taken through. Totally agree with the police chief. Never understood why fully trained field PCs are spending so much time in an office investigating internet crime whilst villains and violent offenders get away with murder, says Gareth in Derbyshire. And I repeat, the Metropolitan Police tweet from October 2017. We have 900 plus specialist officers across London dedicated to investigating all hate crime. Hooray! That's great. But what about the rise in knife crime and everything else? John is calling from Glasgow. Hi, John.
Hi, Nigel. The police are expected to be the arbiters and enforcers for the worst excesses of the equalities and minorities agenda in this country, which disproportionately dominates public and political discourse now, that it's got to ridiculous levels.
So, but what should the police do? I mean, one of the jobs, of course, of the police is to heal rifts that exist between communities, isn't it, in a way?
Well, what the police should do, there is another actual legislation on the statute books which has been there much longer, which is prosecute many of these people for wasting police time.
Yeah, that doesn't really happen, does it?
No, it doesn't. They should do a bit more of that, I think. I mean, it's so laughable that they're even in Scotland now talking about making ageism a hate crime. So what that then
Quite
means
right
is,
too, John. I mean, how old are you, John?
Well, I better not say that, but
Come on,
let's put
tell
it
me.
this way. If I go on the bus, next time I go on the bus and some young woman decides to give up her seat for me and I feel incredibly embarrassed, I'll report her for a hate crime.
Absolutely.
Ageism. That's how laughable it's become.
Well, and I'm guessing that people without full heads of hair might suffer in the future, and maybe that could be registered as some form of hate crime. I don't know. John, you feel the whole thing's gone crackers, yeah?
Absolutely. Even you know, politicians, SNP government ministers are reporting Labour councillors for what they said to officials that might be regarded as racist. Our First Minister is being investigated now because in office 3 or 4 years ago he might have touched somebody. That's employment. That's internal disciplinary stuff. It's wasting police time. It's wasting police time.
At a time, John. At a time, John, when violent crime is going up and going up sharply. John says it's PC gone mad. I think a lot of you will probably agree with that. Others will say, look, horrible things do get said. People get horribly victimised. I'm not saying this stuff doesn't matter, but I do think prioritising on violent crime is really, really important. And I just wonder, why has this agenda completely taken hold? Why has it taken hold? Why can't the police use their powers to discriminate? They should do that, surely. They've got to decide what's important and what's not. I think that makes sense. Does Rob, a new caller from Northampton, think that?
Absolutely. My ex-girlfriend worked in the domestic violence unit.
Yes.
And the stuff that she had to deal with, but there's never going to be a place where she can prioritise things. She has to look at everything. So the police commissioner can come out and say whatever she wants, but police aren't going to be able to turn this down. But the wastage involved, the number of cases where people make fake accusations, the police still spend hours and hours and hours investigating all of it, is bonkers.
Yeah, and a very good way, Rob. And a very good way. If you want to really hurt somebody that you don't like, go to the police and accuse them of a hate crime, and you maybe cost them their job, and it could be baseless. And I think I'll link what you've said with what the previous caller said, that actually reverse prosecutions for wasting police time, a few of those might be a very good thing indeed. Rob, thank you very much indeed for your call. Thank you, all of you, for your calls and comments. Look, there isn't, I'm not saying that hate crime doesn't matter, but I'm saying we're broadening the definitions, it seems, almost by the month. And when Police Chief Sarah Thornton says a lot of this is a result of well-funded lobbies, I think she is absolutely right. And I'm sure a big majority of the country want to see a prioritisation on violent crime, because there is way too much of it. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back here on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Tonight at 10, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dale.
I've got a question for you, Nigel. Do you ever have a drink if you're in an airport before 10 o'clock in the morning?
Must be known. I hear they're going to ban it. I mean, this is PC gone bad.
Well, this is what we're going to be talking about after 9.
I'll ring in.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, coming